All right, let me pose a question for you to consider. How can one discern and recognize whether a special situation, something decisive in the course of one's life, is or was the result of God's divine will, or simply the product of human will? For example, consider the bonds of family, or the union with a wife or husband. Here we're going to divide it into two parts. What has already happened? And the other, what is to come? How I decide it. What has already happened? And then you got married, or perhaps we got married without really taking God's divine will into account at all, but simply based on various human factors, or the fleeting whims we had at that specific time in our lives. And time goes by, and now we find ourselves faced with this will of God. What happens then? Clearly, it is no longer just a time for making choices. Now is the moment to radiate the light of this divine will onto everything you have previously committed to. If you got married 10 years ago, and it turns out that now you suffer a lot because of that marriage, it's no longer about whether it was God's will 10 years ago for you to get married or not. Now rather, ask yourself how you are going to live through this suffering as God's current will for you. Because right now you have the choice to live your suffering, your sorrows caused by your difficult husband, because that's usually what people say, right? Or because of your difficult wife, which also happens. It's no longer about whether it was or wasn't. Now it's about how I'm going to live this in God's will. All this suffering that he or she is causing me, I'm going to shed light on it with everything we've said about suffering. All the humiliations that he or she puts me through, I'm going to shed light on them with everything I'm learning about God's will. All the rejections, I'm going to shed light on them with everything I'm learning about God's will, so that this is what I was telling you. Many times, all those feelings of guilt and suffering are caused by ourselves. Because even though 10 years ago your mom and dad told you, look, don't marry him or don't marry her, and they tried, let's say, they're to blame for being reckless, directly brought about by their actions. But now that profound sense of suffering can be fully lived through and deeply understood, accepted in accordance with what we are learning about God's will. For the future, how can I truly discern if it is God's will for me to marry this person or for me to marry this particular individual? Well, that is exactly why God has given us the gift of intelligence to guide us, to use it, and to use it with even more careful consideration when it comes to important things and life decisions as significant as this one. And if someone who is thinking about getting married or has marriage ahead of them, if they truly use their intelligence to think and ask God for his guidance and assistance so they can make the right decision and get married, then they are already doing so within the framework of having asked God for his guidance and will. And if they take into consideration that they can get married because they possess a desire to do so, and the other person also truly wants to marry them, and there are no legal or personal obstacles standing in their way, and they decide to get married, then they should be allowed to marry. And then the same thing could happen. After 10 years the sufferings come because there are always crosses, and then after 10 years they'll say, maybe it wasn't God's will for me to get married. No, why would you say that? If you did it uprightly before God and then suffering comes to you, how else would it come? You will also know how to live through them because you already know how sufferings should be lived and how to shed light on the crosses with everything you are learning about the will of God. Of course, and even if people get married hastily, as many did 10, 15, 28 years ago, or as some will do tomorrow, it doesn't change anything. The fundamental issue we are addressing here is the concept of sin. As long as there is no sin, We can experience everything as God's will. I don't know. It seems that with this, that particular explanation would sufficiently address the core of that question.